The federal building on Charlotte Avenue smelled like recycled air and industrial carpet, the kind of institutional smell that never changes, regardless of what decade you walk through the door. Same in courthouses, same in VA processing centers, same in every government building I've ever been inside. And I've been inside more than most people accumulate in a lifetime. I was sitting in a plastic chair outside interview room 3 at 8:47 inches the morning, when my sister Pamela came through the glass doors. She was wearing the camel-colored blazer. I noticed that first. She'd worn it to our mother's funeral. She'd worn it to the meeting with our father's estate attorney. She wore it every time she needed to look like the person who had things under control. It was her armor. I had always known that about her, even when I was too young to have a word for it. Her attorney, Dennis Fairweather, walked a half-step behind her, carrying a slim leather folio, and the expression of a man who had already intuited that the morning was not going to go the way his client believed it would. Pamela saw me when she was 6 feet away. She stopped. I stood. I picked up the black 3-ring binder from the chair beside me, 3 inches thick, 247 pages, every tab labeled in my handwriting by date, account number, and transaction classification, and I handed it to Special Agent Marcus Webb, who was waiting beside the door to the interview room. Miss Holt, Agent Webb said she'd taken her husband's last name 11 years ago, though in my mind she was still Mercer. Thank you for coming in this morning. We have some questions about financial account activity between January 2019 and March 2020. This documentation was provided to us by your sister Diana. He set the binder on the table inside the door. It landed with a sound like a brief, conclusive sentence. Pamela looked at the binder. Then she looked at me. Her attorney put one hand on her forearm, which was the only thing that moved in the room for several seconds. I didn't say anything. I had said everything I needed to say 5 months earlier, alone at my kitchen table at 1 a.m, when I finished the spreadsheet, and understood exactly what I was looking at. The door to interview room 3 opened. My sister and her attorney walked in. The door closed behind them with the soft, mechanical click of a federal building, doing what it was designed to do. I walked to the coffee machine at the end of the hall. It dispensed something beige and barely warm into a paper cup. I drank it standing up, looking out the narrow window at a parking garage across the street, thinking about how far we'd come from the 2 girls who had shared a bedroom on Maple Dell Road in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, back when the world was small enough to ride across on a bicycle. But to understand how I got here, how a 3-inch binder became the last word. In 14 months of wire transfers, forged signatures, and a certainty on my sister's part that I was too broken to notice any of it. I need to go back to the morning I boarded a military transport to Kandahar. It was a Tuesday morning when I first understood, in a precise way, what it costs to make yourself indispensable. I was sitting at a folding table in the back room of the VA Resource Center on Craft Street, helping a veteran named Eugene fill out a VA disability compensation claim. Eugene was 61, Army Infantry, both knees shot from 20 years of field service. He'd been trying to complete the same form for 4 months. He kept getting the same rejection letter. The letter cited insufficient documentation. I pulled up the form on the laptop between us. It was the same VA Form 2-1-526-EZ. I had filed myself 2 years earlier. I know every field. I know which boxes the processing centers scan first, and which supporting documents they require, that the instructions don't explicitly mention. We worked through it together for about 40 minutes, Eugene wrote slowly because of the arthritis in his right hand. I didn't rush him. When we finished, I printed the completed form. He held it for a moment, looking at it the way people look at things. They've been trying to reach for a long time. Thank you, he said. Nobody explained it like that before. I told him it wasn't complicated, once you knew what they were actually asking for. I didn't tell him that the last time I'd seen that form, it had been used against me, that someone had filed a version of it in my name, without my knowledge. to redirect the money it represented into an account I didn't control. That wasn't Eugene's story to carry. It was mine. My name is Diana Mercer. I am 48 years old. I live in Clarksville, Tennessee, in a 2-bedroom rental house I've been in for 3 years. I haven't bought anything yet. After 15 years of relocating on the Army's schedule, making a mortgage feel permanent is a commitment. I'm still working up to. The lease renews every 12 months. That feels right. For now. I retired from the U.S. Army in the spring of 2022, not because I had finished, but because my left shoulder had. A Humvee rollover outside Kandahar in 2018 tore through the rotator cuff comprehensively enough that the surgeons at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center used the phrase, significant structural compromise. I recovered most of the range of motion. On cold mornings, or long days at a desk, I can tell precisely where the remainder went. For 15 years, I worked as an Army Intelligence Analyst. That title is deliberately undramatic. The work was methodical and largely invisible pattern recognition, source evaluation, the kind of sustained analytical attention that doesn't make for good television. Because nothing explodes. You sit. You look at data. You find the thing that shouldn't be there, or the thing that should be there but isn't. You build a picture from details that individually mean nothing. I was good at it. Not brilliant, I've known brilliant analysts, and I know what that looks like. I was good at it, the way a carpenter is good at measuring twice. Disciplined. Thorough. Unwilling to accept approximations when the exact answer was available with a little more work. These days, I volunteer 2 mornings a week at a VA resource center on Craft Street in Clarksville. I help veterans navigate the paperwork disability claims, benefit applications, housing assistance forms, pension documentation. The VA's paperwork architecture is not designed for people who have recently come home from a war zone. It is dense, recursive, and written in a register that seems engineered to discourage completion. I know every form. I know every appeals pathway. I know which errors the processing centers make most often, and how to document a response to each of them. That is not a skill the Army teaches you. It is a skill you accumulate when you spend enough years watching other people get lost in systems built to outlast them. I have a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, peppers, a raised bed for herbs I started 2 summers ago. Someone at the resource center told me gardening helps with sleep regulation. They were partially right. I am not someone who shares her problems casually. 15 years in intelligence will recalibrate your relationship to information. You develop an understanding that what you say, and when you say it, and to whom these are not social reflexes. They are decisions with consequences. You learn to hold things until you know what you're holding. So when I came home from my final deployment in March of 2020 and began to understand what my sister had done. During the 14 months I was gone, I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't post anything online. I didn't cry, though there were moments when I was close. I opened a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet became the foundation of a federal fraud investigation that took 5 months to document and 37 minutes to present. Pamela is 6 years older than me. She was always the one who stayed in Murfreesboro, in the family orbit, close to our parents and their routines, and the community in which we grew up. When our father died in 2012, she was the one who handled the arrangements, the calls, the catering for the reception, the thank you notes afterward. She was genuinely skilled at managing situations that required someone to hold things together, while other people fell apart. I recognized that quality in her. I respected it, even when we weren't particularly close. What I didn't understand until much later was that her talent for managing other people's crises had over time become a substitute for managing her own. Our family had what the Landstuhl surgeons might have called significant structural compromise, weight-bearing on the outside, something important missing from the interior. It held its shape for decades before anyone named it. She married Gerald Holt in 2009. Gerald worked as a CPA, had worked as one for most of his adult life, without building much of a practice. He was charming in the way that people are charming, when their confidence exceeds their follow-through. He talked often about deals that were nearly finalized, opportunities that were about to materialize, investments that were 6 weeks from turning around. Over the years, I had watched several of those investments fail quietly and be replaced without acknowledgement by new ones. A rental property in Smyrna that never found stable tenants, a commercial real estate partnership that dissolved with losses, a second car purchase, justified by a business use that never fully existed. Gerald had the vocabulary of financial competence. He simply lacked the infrastructure. Together, they had the particular quality of people who spend slightly more than they have, and trust that the gap will eventually close on its own. The first time Pamela called me for money was 2015. I was stationed at Fort Meade. She needed $4,200 to bridge a gap between selling one house and closing on another. I transferred the money the next day. She repaid it over 8 months, in amounts ranging from $400 to $800, without me asking twice. I remember thinking that the repayment was actually a good sign, that it meant this was what she'd said, it was a temporary inconvenience, not a pattern. The second time was 2017. $7,500 for a medical bill her insurance had underpaid. She said she'd have it back by spring. She sent $3,000 over the following 4 months, then stopped. When I mentioned it once, she mentioned Gerald's father's health and the stress they were under, and I said of course, and gave her more time. I wrote the remaining $4,500 down in my notebook as something I wasn't expecting to see again. And I moved on. Families absorb these things. That's part of what families are for. That same week, a postcard arrived in the mail. Destin, Florida. A beach I recognized from travel magazines. Pamela's handwriting on the back. Rough year. Needed to decompress. Take care of yourself. No mention of the $4,500. No mention of a plan. Just the image of white sand and turquoise water. And a sentence about self-care. Sent from a beach vacation funded by a debt. She had quietly decided not to repay. I set the postcard on the counter. I did not throw it away. I am not sure why. She was staying in touch. She had already decided the accounting between us was finished. I should have kept cleaner notes. In intelligence work, you document everything without exception, because the detail that seems irrelevant at 9 a.m. is frequently the detail that matters at 11. In family, I made exceptions. I made them because making exceptions felt like an expression of trust, and trust is what I wanted to extend. That was not stupidity. It was the desire to believe that the people I came from were who I hoped they were. There is something I need to say about those two loans, the $4,200 and the $7,500, because they matter to what happened next, not because of the amounts, but because of what they established between us, without either of us naming what was being established. What they established was this: I was a resource, available, replenishable, and disinclined to push back. Every time I said, "Take your time," and meant it. Every time I absorbed a gap in repayment without comment. Every time I gave without requiring documentation, I was teaching Pamela something about what I would and would not require from her. Not intentionally, not consciously, but the lesson was being taught. The lesson was that my trust had no ceiling and no mechanism for verification. I didn't know I was teaching her that. I thought I was being a good sister. In December of 2018, with deployment orders for Afghanistan arriving after the holidays, I did what I always did before an extended absence. I updated my USAA account settings, confirmed my VA benefit direct deposit routing, and signed a general durable power of attorney so that if something needed handling stateside while I was gone, someone I trusted could handle it. I gave that POA to Pamela. She came to the house to collect the signed copy. She was wearing the camel-colored blazer, the one I would later see on her at our mother's funeral, at the estate attorney's office. And finally, in a federal hallway on Charlotte Avenue, I noticed it that day. The way you notice something without yet understanding what you're noticing. She was wearing it the way she always wore it. The way you wear something, when you want to look like you know what you're doing. I signed the document. She folded it into her bag. She hugged me before she left and said to stay safe. I gave the POA to her because she had been reliable before, and because I had 4 days before I left, and because she was family. The account balance in my USAA combat savings, when I boarded the transport to Kandahar in January 2019, was $127,300. I had been saving since my first deployment. Not aggressively. I am not a person who thinks much about accumulation, but consistently. A set amount from each paycheck. No car payments. Modest rent on base housing. The number had grown the way patient numbers grow, through time more than strategy. $127,300. 14 months of deployment ahead of me. A general power of attorney signed and notarized, and in my sister's possession. I flew east. I did the job. I came home in March of 2020 to a world reorganized by a pandemic I'd been largely insulated from, and to an account balance of $4,811.22. In those first weeks home, Pamela was attentive in ways that I now understand were calibrated. She called often. She offered to help me get settled. She mentioned twice, in passing, as though delivering information too minor to require a full conversation, that my USAA account had gotten a little low while I was deployed, because she'd had some unavoidable expenses come up. She said she had meant to talk to me about it when things calmed down. She said it with the practiced tone of someone confessing to nothing while confessing to everything. I said I'd take a look at it when I got organized. She said, "Of course, take your time, you've just gotten home." I wrote 3 words in the green Army issue notebook. I keep in my jacket pocket. Check every number. Then I let 6 months go by, because I was tired in ways that were difficult to explain, and because I wanted, desperately, for the ordinary things to be ordinary, for the people I loved to be the people I believed them to be. That is a very human thing to want. I have made my peace with having wanted it. The numbers existed before I looked at them. $127,300 in the account when I boarded the transport. 14 months of deployment ahead. $6,228 in VA disability compensation due every month. I was gone. 23 transfers I hadn't yet counted. I didn't know those figures when I came home, but they were already there, waiting. The way facts always wait, patient, exact, indifferent to how long it takes someone to find them. I wasn't ready to find them yet. Have you ever come home from a deployment, from a hard job, from any long season where you were out of reach and discovered that someone you trusted had treated your absence as an opportunity? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe that serving your country should not cost you everything you built while serving it, subscribe to this channel. I did not panic in the first week home. In intelligence work, you develop a specific discipline around premature reaction. The worst analytical errors happen when emotion precedes evidence. The instinct to move fast, to act on incomplete information. To do something that instinct is expensive. I had learned to wait until I had a complete picture before I moved. So I waited. I slept, or tried to. I ate. I sat in the backyard and watched the light change over the yard, and let the re-entry happen the way re-entries have to happen. Slowly and without forcing. Then, on a Tuesday night in September 2020, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and my green notebook, and I began. That notebook had always been where I recorded what other people owed me: small debts, favors, obligations I had extended without requiring acknowledgement. Sitting down that night, I opened it to a blank page and wrote the date at the top. What I was about to write in it was different. Not what others owed me. What had been taken. I started with January 2019. Account balance. Full transaction export. Spreadsheet. At 11:34 p.m., I found the first transfer I couldn't explain. $9,400. Outgoing. To an account I didn't recognize. I ran the routing number. The destination was a Nashville area bank. Joint account. I didn't yet know whose, but I wrote the number down. At 12:07 a.m., I found the pattern. The transfers were spaced approximately 30 days apart. Not utility payments. Not any recurring service I'd authorized. Outgoing transfers. 23 of them over 14 months. Amounts ranging from $3,800 to $11,400. All going to the same destination routing number, $127,300. Total. Exact. At 1:19 a.m., I pulled my VA benefit records. What I found took a few minutes to fully process. The direct deposit routing for my disability compensation, $6,228 per month, which I'd been receiving since 2018 for the shoulder and associated service-connected conditions, had been changed. A routing update had been filed on the 3rd of February 2019, 3 weeks after I deployed. The submission had a digital timestamp, a submitter identification number, and an IP address. I wrote all three down. 14 months of payments. $6,228 per month. $87,200 total. I added it to the combat savings drain, $214,500 combined. I sat with that number for a while. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people imagine it differently than it is. There was no explosion of feeling, no sudden clarity cut with fury. What I felt was something more like the particular coldness that arrives when something you had almost allowed yourself to not believe has been confirmed. The body's way of saying, you already knew. You had been not knowing deliberately, because knowing required moving, and you weren't ready to move yet. I wrote the total at the bottom of the legal pad. I circled it. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Audit, not Revenge, not a plan yet, just the accurate word for what I was doing. Counting, not anger, not grief, counting. I went back to the beginning of the transaction log and started again. Because in intelligence work, you always check your own analysis. You look for the interpretation that exonerates. You do not assume guilt when an alternative reading exists. So I reran every number, cross-referenced every date, looked for any legitimate explanation for any single transfer. By 2:48 a.m., I had checked everything twice. I was not wrong. I closed the laptop. My shoulder had stiffened from the hours hunched over the keyboard, the way it does when I stay too long in one position. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where the herb bed was a dark rectangle in the grass. Rosemary. Thyme. Something I'd planted in April that I still hadn't fully identified. I went to bed not because I was finished, but because the next step required the county recorder's office, and daylight and a clearer head than I had at 3 in the morning. The folder on my desktop was named Audit. I had given it that name for a reason, because an audit is not an accusation, it is a process. And a process, done correctly, produces something that cannot be argued with. That was what I was going to build. Evidence does not build itself. I want to say that plainly. Because I have noticed that people sometimes imagine investigations as passive events, as if truth simply rises to the surface on its own, given enough time. It does not. Truth is a filing system. Someone has to create it. I spent 5 months creating mine. The transaction records from USAA covered every account access and every transfer between January 2019 and March 2020. What the records also contained and what I had not initially looked at were the login session metadata. Every time someone had accessed my account online during my deployment, the system had logged the originating IP address, the device class, and the timestamp. 100% of those sessions originated from the same IP address, a residential IP registered to a home in Brentwood, Tennessee. I looked up the address. It was the house Pamela and Gerald had moved into in 2018. She had not used a VPN. She had not created a secondary account. She had not varied her access patterns, or taken any step to obscure the source of the logins. She had logged into my account from her home network, on her home computer, for 14 consecutive months, apparently confident that I would never look. That is the specific quality I have come to think of as competence blindness. Not the belief that one is smart, the belief that the person one is deceiving is not. She had watched me come home quieter, thinner, struggling with sleep and adjustment, and the particular weight of a final deployment. And she had concluded, I believe sincerely, that I was diminished, that there were gaps in my attention that could be walked through without consequence. She had forgotten what I did for 15 years. I requested the physical power of attorney document from the VA records office. I then contacted Rosalind Torres, a retired Army CID agent I had served alongside at Fort Meade, who now ran a private forensic document practice in Fayetteville, and asked her to review it. Along with the VA benefit redirect form from February 2019, we met at a diner near her house on a cold Thursday in November. She brought a loupe and a portable UV light in a canvas case. She spent 20 minutes with the documents before she said anything. 2 things, she said, setting down the loupe. First, the notary stamp on this power of attorney is from a Nashville area notary public. I called the notary registry this morning. There is no record of them processing a POA for a Diana Mercer in December 2018. The stamp was replicated. She moved the UV light over the VA redirect form. Second, this signature is not yours. It's close. Whoever did this practiced. But the pen pressure pattern is wrong in 3 places, and the terminal stroke on the R in Mercer doesn't match your authenticated signature on file with the VA. She looked up at me. This is forgery, Diana. Not crude forgery. Careful forgery. But forensically, it doesn't hold. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need to go to the FBI. This isn't a civil dispute. The benefit redirect alone is federal benefits fraud. The POA forgery makes it worse." I nodded. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About a week." She looked at the binder I'd placed on the table between us. It was 181 pages at that point. I had 66 more to add. "How long have you been building this?" 2 months. She looked at me the way people who've done intelligence work look at each other when something has been done right. Not admiringly, just with recognition. "File it," she said. "Everything you have." In February of 2021, through Rosalind's referral, I met with Special Agent Marcus Webb at the FBI's Nashville field office. I brought the binder. By then it was 247 pages. I had written a 1-page executive summary for the front dates, amounts, account numbers, legal citations, the specific federal statutes involved. Clean. No emotional language, just the facts in the sequence they occurred. Agent Webb read the summary. Then he opened to 3 random tabs and read those. He closed the binder and rested both hands on top of it. "Miss Mercer," he said, "this is one of the most organized case presentations I've received from a civilian complainant in 14 years. I'm retired Army," I said. "Not exactly civilian by training." He nodded slowly. "How long did it take you to compile this?" 5 months. "Does your sister know you've been doing this?" "No." He looked at the binder for a moment longer. "Good," he said. "The 14th of April, 2021. Federal Building on Charlotte Avenue. Interview, room 3. I arrived at 8:30 a.m. and sat in the plastic chair outside the room, with the binder on the seat beside me, and the green notebook in my jacket pocket. Though there was nothing left in this case to write down, the habit is 17 years old. I carry the notebook everywhere. Pamela arrived at 9:03 with Dennis Fairweather. The camel blazer, the controlled walk, the posture of someone who has told herself that this is manageable, that she knows what she is walking into, that the meeting has been overblown by her attorney's caution, and will conclude with clarifications and a handshake. She saw me at 6 feet. She stopped. Then she did something I had not expected. She turned to Agent Webb, not to me, and spoke first. "I appreciate you making time for this," she said. The voice was steady. The camel blazer, the controlled posture, the attorney at her shoulder. She had dressed for a meeting she believed she could manage. There was an authorized arrangement in place. I was managing my sister's financial affairs. During her deployment with her full knowledge, whatever discrepancies have been flagged, I'm confident we can address them quickly. She said it with complete confidence. She believed it. The thing I noticed, the detail that has stayed with me more clearly than anything else in that room, was her hands. She'd been holding her purse strap with both hands, in the slightly tight way people hold things when they are trying to look composed. The moment her sentence ended, and the room did not respond the way she expected, her hands went completely still. I stood. I picked up the binder. I handed it to Agent Webb. I said nothing. "Miss Holt," Agent Webb said, "we have questions about account activity between January 2019 and March 2020. This documentation was provided by your sister." He placed the binder on the table inside the interview room doorway. It landed with a sound that was not loud, just final, the way a period sounds at the end of a sentence. That has been coming for a long time. The room went very still. All I could hear was the HVAC unit humming somewhere above the drop ceiling, and the faint sound of traffic on Charlotte Avenue 3 floors down. Pamela looked at it. She looked at me. Fairweather's hand found her arm. Agent Webb opened the binder to the first tabbed section. He did not editorialize. He did not build to anything. He simply read what the document said. "Miss Holt, can you explain 23 wire transfers from your sister's USAA combat savings account to a joint account held in your name and your husband Gerald Holt's name, totaling $127,300, made between February 2019 and February 2020, during your sister's deployment to Afghanistan?" The room was silent. "Can you explain a change of routing request filed with the Department of Veterans Affairs on the 3rd of February 2019, 3 weeks after your sister deployed, redirecting 14 months of VA disability compensation payments, totaling $87,200 to the same joint account?" Fairweather made a sound that was not quite a word. Agent Webb turned a page 94. He read without looking up. "These are IP address logs from every online session, accessing Diana Mercer's USAA account during her deployment. 100% of those sessions originate from a single residential IP address. That address is registered to a property in Brentwood, Tennessee." He paused. "Can you tell me whose address that is?" No answer. "It is the address at which you currently reside, Miss Holt." The room had a specific quality of stillness in it by then, the kind that comes not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something that cannot be undone. Pamela spoke for the first time. Her voice was steadied with visible effort. Diana was having difficulty before she deployed. She asked me to help manage her financial affairs. She authorized me to act on her behalf. Agent Webb turned to a different section. He did not argue with her. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned to page 137 and read the forensic document examiner's conclusions aloud that the notary stamp on the POA was not from a registered notarization of Diana Mercer, that the signature on the VA benefit redirect form did not match Diana Mercer's authenticated signature on file, that both documents showed indicators consistent with deliberate replication rather than original execution. He closed the binder. "Page 137, he said. "The examiner's conclusion. Forgery." That was the shortest sentence in the room that morning. It did not need elaboration. What followed was not a confession. Real confessions rarely are the thing movies suggest. They are immediate, tearful, relieved. What followed was Fairweather requesting a recess. Agent Webb granting 10 minutes. Pamela's face losing the last of its performed composure. The door to the hallway opening. Fairweather stepping out to make a phone call. He did not want anyone to overhear. I walked to the coffee machine. I stood at the window. The parking garage across the street was filling up with the ordinary morning traffic of people going to ordinary jobs. I thought about the first time I ever saw my sister cry. We were 12 and 6. She had knocked our mother's favorite ceramic bowl off the counter by accident and was paralyzed with guilt. I had told her to blame it on the cat. We didn't have a cat. Our mother had looked at us both for a long moment and then laughed. and the bowl had somehow not been mentioned again. I thought about that, and then I finished my coffee. And I walked back to the hallway outside interview room 3. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Pamela came out ahead of her attorney. She walked past me without looking at me, which told me everything I needed to know about where the next several months were heading. The next time I would see her would be at the sentencing in October. The federal charges were wire fraud and federal benefits fraud. Gerald Holt was named as a co-conspirator. The prosecution established through financial forensics that he had monitored the destination account, managed the incoming transfers, and structured a number of the larger withdrawals in a pattern consistent with deliberate concealment. The court-appointed forensic accountant's report described the scheme as coordinated and premeditated, designed to exploit a general power of attorney, during a period when the account holder had no reasonable means of immediate oversight. The sentencing hearing was in October of 2021. I sat in the 4th row. I did not speak during the victim impact statement portion. I had submitted mine in writing. It was 2 pages. No emotional language. Dates. Amounts. A closing sentence. I ask only that the court recognize this offense for what it was, not a family matter, but a federal crime against a veteran's service-protected accounts. Pamela received 32 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised release. Gerald received 22 months and a permanent bar from serving as a fiduciary in any capacity. Restitution of $214,500 was ordered in full. I drove home to Clarksville after the hearing. I stopped at a hardware store and bought new stakes for the tomato plants, which had gotten taller than the existing ones could support. I spent an hour in the backyard after dinner, tying up the vines in the cooling October air, my left shoulder aching the way it does when I've been holding tension for too many consecutive hours. A wire transfer of $43,000 arrived 8 months after sentencing. The remainder is subject to a payment schedule, tied to the liquidation of Pamela and Gerald's assets. The Brentwood house, sold. The rental property in Smyrna, sold. Gerald's CPA license, suspended and not reinstated. I don't know how much of the total I will ultimately recover. Federal restitution orders are legal instruments, not guarantees. I knew that going in. I did not build the evidence file for financial recovery alone. I built it because the evidence existed, and because allowing a provable thing to go unproven is a form of dishonesty that I have never been able to accept, not in intelligence work, and not in my own life. The Brentwood house sold in March 2022, 2 years to the month after I flew home from Kandahar. Sale price $387,000. After the outstanding mortgage and legal fees. The net to Pamela and Gerald, 0. The rental property in Smyrna sold the following June for $210,000, after the liens Gerald had accumulated against it. Over 8 years of refinancing, the net, also 0. Gerald's CPA registration was permanently revoked on August 9th. The Lexus he'd been driving around Brentwood disappeared from their driveway sometime that autumn. I only know that because a neighbor mentioned it. 23 transfers out, 23 months of consequences in. That is not symmetry I arranged. It is symmetry that the numbers arranged themselves. The estate Pamela had spent 2 years acquiring turned out to be exactly what the Landstuhl surgeons had once described my shoulder. Significant structural compromise. It looked like wealth from the outside. Underneath, the load-bearing capacity had been quietly failing for years. One transfer too many. And the whole thing gave way. The green notebook went on the shelf in my bedroom, where I keep things I want to keep without needing daily. It had carried 2 years of evidence dates, amounts, IP addresses, the forensic examiner's phrase, deliberate replication, written out in my own handwriting. Because writing things down makes them real. There was nothing left to write in it. That was not emptiness. That was completion. I made coffee. The tomatoes needed watering. I watered them. I am no longer the soldier you counted on. While you spent my deployments. That sentence took me longer to mean than it took me to compose. The words came easily. The belief underneath them, the permission to say them and hold them, and not apologize for having arrived at them, that took longer. That is the reckoning that doesn't appear in any federal filing. That is the one that happens quietly, in a backyard, after everyone else has gone home. Several months after the sentencing, I drove through Charlotte Avenue on my way to an appointment across town. I wasn't thinking about the building until I was already passing it. The same gray exterior, the same flag above the entrance, the recycled air and industrial carpet still in there somewhere, holding the weight of other people's reckonings. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to go back inside. That is how I know it was finished. If you've stayed with me through this, I want to speak to you directly now. Not about the case, not about my sister, not about the specifics of what happened. Between January 2019 and April 2021, I want to talk about what I think the story is actually about, which is something that exists well beneath the dollar amounts. It is about the role every family assigns them. There is the one who holds things together, the one who is called first when something goes wrong, the one who shows up reliably, who sends money when asked, who manages a crisis quietly, and does not require anyone to acknowledge the managing. In some families, that person is the oldest child. In others, the youngest. In some, it's the one who left the one who went away and built something, and was therefore assumed to be doing fine, assumed to have more than enough, assumed to be capable of absorbing more, because she had never once said otherwise. I was that person. 15 years in the Army taught me a specific kind of endurance, the endurance of showing up without recognition, of doing things that look ordinary, until the moment they are revealed to not be, of carrying what needs to be carried without announcing the weight. Those are qualities that serve a soldier well. I don't regret having developed them. What I didn't understand, not fully, not until the spreadsheet, is that those same qualities make an extraordinarily attractive target for exploitation. My sister saw someone who had always absorbed difficulty without complaint, someone who had come home quieter than she'd left, someone dealing with sleep disruption, and the particular readjustment challenges that accompany a final deployment after 15 years. She saw those things, and she concluded, I believe, not from cruelty, but from the logic of someone who had been quietly told for years that I could handle whatever came my way, that I would not look, that I was too busy adjusting to examine my own account, that by the time I was back on my feet, the transfers would have been long enough ago to seem like settled history. She was wrong about the looking. She was not entirely wrong about why she believed I wouldn't. I want to say something about that, because I think it matters. There is a particular vulnerability that comes with having served, in the way many of us served. You come home from deployment, with your defenses calibrated for a threat environment that no longer exists. You are hyper-vigilant in directions that don't apply to the grocery store, to family dinners, to the ordinary rhythms of civilian life. And in the spaces where you should perhaps be more vigilant, finances, legal documents, the slow accumulation of obligations that other people make on your behalf, while you are looking elsewhere, you are often less so, because you are exhausted, because you want the people you love to be trustworthy, because examining that trust too carefully feels, in the moment, like a kind of accusation you are not yet ready to make. That is not weakness. I want to name that clearly. It is not weakness. It is a very human consequence of having extended maximum trust in the direction you were pointed, and then coming home and wanting to extend it again in a different direction. Because that is how people survive connection to other people. You trust, you extend, you hope. The error is not in trusting, the error is in not looking. And here is what I want to say to you directly, whether you are a veteran or not. Whether you have family members with access to your finances or not, you are allowed to look. You are allowed at any time, without explanation, without guilt, without treating it as an accusation, to review your own accounts, to read the documents you signed, to verify the routing numbers on the direct deposits you've authorized, to check the POA you gave to someone, even someone you love, to open the statements you've been meaning to open, not because you are paranoid, not because you assume the worst of the people in your life, but because every number in your financial life is a fact, and facts do not become less important. Because they are inconvenient to examine. In intelligence work, we called it source verification. You do not assume a source is accurate, because it has been accurate before. You verify, not because you distrust the source, but because verification is not distrust. Verification is method. Verification is what separates assumption from knowledge. Apply that to your finances, especially if you are someone who has spent years being the reliable one, the competent one, the one everyone counts on. Especially then, because the people who benefit from your reliability are not always the people who think most carefully about protecting it. I have worked at the VA Resource Center long enough to know that what happened to me is not an isolated story. The specific details, the deployment, the sister, the forensic document examination, those belong to me. But the underlying structure, the exploitation of a veteran's absence or distraction, or service-connected difficulty to access assets that person built through sacrifice that I see reflected in the experiences of more people than I can count. It happens across relationships. It happens across financial situations. It happens whenever someone with access to power of attorney, or joint accounts or benefit routing information, is left without meaningful oversight. The protection is not paranoia. The protection is documentation. Keep your own records. Not obsessively, not in a way that poisons every relationship you have, but specifically. If you give someone POA for any reason, document the date, the scope, and the termination condition. Review the accounts that POA touches on a regular schedule. If you authorize someone else to receive or manage any portion of your income or benefits, verify that the routing is doing what you intended. Request the transaction logs. Read them. These are not difficult things. They are the things I should have done before I boarded that transport, and the things I will do, without exception, for the rest of my life. There is one more thing I want to say. My sister did not do what she did because she was a monster. I want to be clear about that, because clarity is more useful than simplification. She did it because she was in financial trouble, that she had been ashamed of for a long time, and because she had calculated incorrectly. But with some internal logic, I can follow that I was the safest person to take from, because I had always absorbed, because I had always given, because I had always somehow been fine. Understanding that doesn't excuse it. It doesn't reduce the charge to something less than what it was. But understanding it does something that pure fury cannot do. It allows me to put it down. Not to forget, not to forgive on any schedule that wasn't mine, but to recognize it for what it was, a failure of desperation, not of character, and then to carry only what belongs to me. Which is the evidence and the outcome, not the story she told herself about who I was. I carry the green notebook. I carry the habit of checking the numbers. I carry the knowledge that I can build something methodically, alone, in the quiet hours that holds. What I no longer carry is the role, the position of the person who can absorb anything, because she has never said she couldn't. I put that down in the backyard in Clarksville on an October evening, between the tomato stakes and the fading light, and I have not picked it back up. That is the audit this story is really about. Not of my sister's finances, of what I owed myself and to whom I owed it. The answer, it turned out, was straightforward. I owed it to myself. One more thing, before I go. There is a version of this story in which I am defined by what was taken from me. $214,000. 14 months. The certainty that the people I trusted were watching out for me while I was watching out for everyone else. Those losses are real. I don't minimize them. But they are not the version of this story I am interested in carrying. The version I carry is this. I came home. I looked. I built the file. I filed it. Those 4 sentences are the whole of it. Not the betrayal, which belonged to Pamela. Not the grief, which I processed on my own time, and nobody else's schedule. Not even the outcome, which the court determined. The part that was mine, the part no one could take and no one gave me, was the looking, and the building, and the filing. You can always look. You can always build. You can always file. Whatever your version of a federal binder is a conversation you've been avoiding. A document you haven't read? An account you haven't reviewed? A question you've been calling too small to ask you can begin it tonight, at your kitchen table, with a notepad and a cup of coffee that will probably go cold before you finish. That is where every audit starts. Not in a federal building, not in a courtroom, at a table alone with the facts in front of you and the decision to look at them honestly. I hope you look. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people who deserve it. And if you've been carrying a role that was never yours to carry, you are allowed to put it down. If this story meant something to you today, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs this reminder. Your silence has never been weakness. Your patience has never been compliance. And the receipts you kept are exactly as powerful as you always suspected they were.